Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Have you ever walked into a place where you knew you belonged only to be treated like you were nothing? Well, let me tell you about the day that changed everything for me. The day I walked into a bank wearing my old worn-out shoes, and the manager looked at me like I was trash he needed to sweep out the door. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was what was waiting in my account. This is my story, and I need you to hear every single word of it because what happened that day taught me more about human nature, about pride, about humility, and about the masks we all wear than any book or lecture ever could. I'm telling you this not just to share what happened, but because I believe somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this, someone who's been looked down upon, someone who's been dismissed because of how they look, or what they wear, or where they come from. So settle in, because this story starts long before that day at the bank, and it's going to take you through every emotion I felt, every thought that raced through my mind, and every lesson I learned along the way. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I experienced, and I'm going to share it with you from the very depths of my heart. You see, I've never been the kind of person who cares much about appearances. Growing up, my family didn't have much money, and I learned early on that the value of a person has absolutely nothing to do with the clothes they wear, or the car they drive, or the watch on their wrist. My father used to tell me that character is built in the quiet moments when no one is watching, and that real wealth isn't about what you show the world. It's about what you build for yourself and for the people you love. Those words stuck with me my entire life, and they shaped the way I approached everything from my education to my career to the way I handled money. I worked hard, incredibly hard, harder than most people could imagine. I started from the bottom, taking jobs that other people thought were beneath them, saving every penny I could, investing wisely, learning about finance and business and economics not from expensive schools but from libraries and online courses and late nights studying after exhausting days of work. I lived frugally, not because I had to after a certain point, but because I wanted to. I drove the same old car for 15 years. I wore clothes until they were threadbare. I lived in a modest apartment when I could have afforded a mansion, and I put my money where it could grow, where it could work for me, where it could build the kind of security that my family never had. Over the years, over decades really, I built something substantial. I made investments that paid off. I started businesses that succeeded. I made smart decisions when others were being reckless, and slowly, steadily, my net worth grew to numbers that would shock most people. But here's the thing. I never told anyone. I didn't wear designer clothes or flash expensive jewelry or post about my success on social media. I lived my life quietly, humbly, exactly the way I always had, and the people around me had no idea what I had accumulated. My neighbors thought I was just another working-class guy struggling to get by. My friends assumed I was doing okay but nothing special, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I had seen what money did to people, how it changed relationships, how it brought out the worst in humanity, and I wanted no part of that circus. I wanted to live authentically, to know that the people in my life cared about me for who I was, not for what I had. The years passed, and my life continued in this quiet, unassuming way. I went to work every day. I came home to my simple apartment. I cooked my own meals. I read books. I took walks in the park, and I watched my investments grow with a sense of deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with ego or pride. It was the satisfaction of knowing I had built something real, something solid, something that couldn't be taken away by economic downturns or bad luck, or the whims of fate. I had created genuine financial security through discipline and patience and smart decision-making, and that meant more to me than any luxury item ever could. But I'm human, and I'll admit there were times when I wondered what it would be like to live differently, to buy that sports car I'd always admired, to travel first class instead of economy, to stay in five-star hotels instead of budget motels, to wear expensive suits and shoes that didn't have holes worn in the soles. But every time those thoughts crept in, I remembered why I was doing this. I remembered the values my father instilled in me, and I remembered that true happiness doesn't come from impressing strangers or collecting material possessions. It comes from knowing who you are, from being secure in yourself, from building something meaningful and lasting. And so I continued on my path, wearing my old shoes with pride, driving my old car without shame, living my simple life with contentment, all while my bank account told a very different story than my appearance suggested. I had relationships during those years. some that lasted and some that didn't, and it was always interesting to me to see how people reacted when they eventually learned the truth about my financial situation. Some were genuinely happy for me, others felt deceived or lied to, and a few saw me as a meal ticket they wanted to cash in on. Those reactions told me everything I needed to know about character, about authenticity, about who deserves a place in your life and who doesn't. The people who stayed, the ones who truly mattered, were the ones who had valued me before they knew about the money, and those relationships became even stronger because they were built on something real. But this story isn't about my relationships or my investment strategy or my philosophy on money. Not entirely anyway. This story is about one specific day, one specific moment, one specific interaction that brought everything into crystal clear focus and taught me lessons I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, I remember, because the air had that crisp quality that tells you summer is finally releasing its grip and autumn is settling in. I woke up that day like any other day, made my coffee, ate my simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, and got dressed in my usual attire, jeans that had seen better days, a plain button-down shirt that was clean, but definitely not fashionable, and my shoes, those old leather shoes that I had owned for probably 10 years, shoes that were comfortable and broken in and, yes, worn out, with scuffs and creases and soles that were getting thin. I had been meaning to buy new shoes for months, maybe even years if I'm being honest, but I kept putting it off because these ones still functioned. They still protected my feet, and in my mind, that was all that mattered. Functionality over fashion, practicality over pretense, that was my motto. I had an errand to run that day that I had been postponing for a while. I needed to go to my bank, the main branch downtown where I had held accounts for over 20 years, to discuss some investment opportunities with one of their financial advisors and to make some transfers between accounts. It was routine business, nothing particularly exciting or unusual, just the kind of financial maintenance that responsible people do regularly. I could have done some of it online, but there were documents to sign and specific questions I wanted to ask face-to-face, so I decided to make the trip. I drove my old car to the bank, parked in the public lot, and walked the 2 blocks to the impressive building with its marble columns and glass doors and that air of institutional authority that banks always seem to project. As I approached the entrance, I noticed a few people in expensive suits walking ahead of me, businessmen and businesswomen who looked like they belonged in that world of finance and commerce. And I'll admit, I felt a slight twinge of self-consciousness about my appearance, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew how people tend to judge, how they make assumptions based on surface-level observations, how they treat you differently based on what they perceive your status to be. I walked through those glass doors and into the cool, air-conditioned lobby of the bank, and immediately I felt eyes on me. The security guard glanced at me with a look that was somewhere between suspicion and dismissal. A receptionist at the desk looked me up and down with barely concealed judgment, and I could feel the weight of their assumptions pressing down on me. But I held my head high because I had every right to be there. More right than most of the people in that building, if we're being completely honest about it, and I walked up to the information desk to explain why I was there. The young woman at the desk listened to my request with a polite but cold demeanor, and she directed me to wait in the seating area while she called someone to assist me. I sat down in one of those uncomfortable chairs that banks seem to specialize in, and I waited, watching people come and go, watching how the staff greeted different customers differently, how they smiled warmly at the well-dressed clients and offered curt, minimal service to those who looked less prosperous. It was a masterclass in unconscious bias, in how we treat people based on superficial markers of success, and I found it both fascinating and deeply disturbing. After about 15 minutes, a man approached me, and I could tell immediately from his body language that he had already decided who I was and what I was worth before I even opened my mouth. He was in his mid-40s, I'd guess, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month, perfectly styled hair with just enough gray at the temples to look distinguished, and that particular expression of superiority that some people wear like a badge of honor. He introduced himself as Marcus Patterson, the branch manager, and he asked in a tone that was dripping with condescension what he could help me with today. I stood up, extended my hand for a handshake, which he took reluctantly, his eyes never quite meeting mine, and I explained that I had an appointment to discuss some investment opportunities and needed to make some account transfers. He looked at me skeptically, his gaze traveling from my face down to my worn shoes and back up again, and I could see the doubt forming in his expression, the assumption that I must be confused or lying, or wasting his time. He asked for my name and I gave it to him, and he asked me to follow him to his office. But the way he said it, the way he moved, everything about his demeanor screamed that he thought this was going to be a quick conversation where he'd politely tell me that maybe I should try the credit union down the street instead. We walked through the bank, past the row of teller windows, past the private consultation rooms, to his corner office that had a window overlooking the city and furniture that probably cost more than my car. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk, and he settled into his leather executive chair with the air of someone who was already mentally planning what he was going to have for lunch, because this meeting certainly wasn't going to take long. He opened up his computer, asked for my account information, and started typing, and I sat there quietly, patiently, knowing that in just a few moments, everything was about to change. But before he even pulled up my account, before he had any actual information in front of him, he started talking, and what he said revealed everything about his character and his values, and his complete lack of professionalism. He leaned back in his chair, looked at me with this smug little smile, and said something that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, and I quote this exactly because the words are burned into my memory, "Look, I appreciate you coming in today, but I have to be honest with you. We typically work with clients who have substantial assets to invest, and based on well, let's just say based on your presentation, I'm not sure we're the right fit for your financial needs. We have minimum account balances for our investment services, and I'd hate for you to waste your time or ours if you're not in that category. Perhaps there's a smaller community bank or a credit union that might be better suited to your situation. No offense, of course, but I can tell from those shoes you're wearing that you're probably working with a pretty tight budget, and that's completely fine. We all start somewhere, but our services here are really designed for high net worth individuals. Have you ever been spoken to like that? Have you ever had someone look at you and decide your worth based on something as meaningless as your footwear?" The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and fierce, but I kept it under control because I knew something he didn't, and I wanted to see this play out. I wanted to see his face when reality crashed into his assumptions like a freight train into a wall of ignorance. I took a deep breath, maintained eye contact, and said very calmly, "I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you that I meet whatever minimums you have for your investment services. Perhaps you should check my account before making assumptions." My voice was steady, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a quiet confidence that seemed to give him pause for just a moment. But then that smug smile returned and he said, of course, I'll take a look, but I just want to manage expectations here." He turned to his computer screen, typed in my information, and I watched as his expression changed from condescending amusement to confusion, to absolute shock in the span of about 5 seconds. His eyes widened, his jaw literally dropped open, and the color drained from his face as he stared at the screen like he was seeing a ghost. He blinked several times, leaned closer to the monitor as if he couldn't believe what he was reading, and then he looked at me, then back at the screen, then at me again, and I could see his mind struggling to reconcile what his eyes were telling him with the assumptions he had made. The silence in that office was deafening, and I let it stretch out, let him sit in his discomfort, let him realize exactly how badly he had just messed up. Finally, he stammered, I apologize, Mr. Sir, I wasn't aware your account, it's, substantial. Substantial was an understatement. What he was looking at on that screen was years of careful investing, of smart financial decisions, of compound interest working its magic, of business successes and wise choices, all adding up to a number that put me in the top percentage of clients at that bank, possibly the top client in that entire branch. But I didn't say any of that. I just sat there, watching him squirm, watching him try to recover from his colossal error in judgment, watching him realize that he had just insulted someone who could probably buy and sell him several times over. The power dynamic in that room had shifted so dramatically that you could feel it in the air, and where he had been sitting tall and confident just moments before, he now looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk and disappear. He immediately shifted into damage control mode, his whole demeanor transforming in an instant from condescending gatekeeper to obsequious servant. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry, I had no idea. Obviously I should have checked first before saying anything. That was completely unprofessional of me. I apologize profusely. Please let me." Can I get you some water, coffee, anything at all, please? Let's discuss your investment needs. I can assure you we have the very best options available for someone of your caliber. The words tumbled out of his mouth in a desperate rush, and I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. He was panicking, and he should have been, because what he had done wasn't just rude, it was potentially devastating to his career. If I chose to file a complaint, if I chose to move my substantial assets to another institution, if I chose to make an issue of how I had been treated, it could cost him his job, and he knew it. But here's what he didn't understand yet. Here's what I needed him to learn. This wasn't about revenge or making him pay for his mistake. This was about teaching a lesson that he desperately needed to learn. A lesson about humility, about respect, about treating every single person who walks through your door with dignity regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. I let him stew for another moment, and then I spoke, and my voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need validation from anyone. I said, "Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. The way you treated me when I walked in here was unacceptable. You made assumptions about my financial situation based on my appearance, specifically based on my shoes, and you spoke to me with a level of disrespect that no customer should ever experience, regardless of how much money they have in their account. You judged me without knowing anything about me, and you made me feel like I didn't belong here, in a bank where I've been a loyal customer for over 20 years, in a bank where my assets make up a significant portion of this branch's holdings." I paused, letting those words sink in, watching his face grow even paler if that was possible. "Now you're falling all over yourself to apologize, not because you genuinely feel bad about what you did, but because you saw the numbers on that screen and you realized you made a mistake that could cost you professionally. But what if those numbers weren't there? What if I had walked in here with these same shoes and actually did have a modest account? Would your behavior have been any less wrong? Would I have deserved that treatment because I didn't meet your standards of wealth?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I wasn't finished. "This is a lesson, Marcus, and I want you to really hear what I'm about to say because it's important. Not just for your career, but for you as a human being. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, deserves dignity, deserves to be treated with kindness and professionalism, whether they're wearing worn-out shoes like mine or designer loafers like yours. You don't know people's stories. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what they've built or what they're capable of, and you have no right to judge them based on superficial observations. I've spent my entire life living below my means, saving, investing, building wealth quietly and humbly, and I've done it while wearing these same old shoes, because I learned a long time ago that material possessions don't define worth. That character is built in how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you, and that true success is measured not by what you show the world, but by what you build for yourself and others. The fact that you couldn't see past my appearance to treat me like a valued customer says everything about your character and nothing about mine." The office was silent except for the sound of his breathing, and I could see tears forming in his eyes, whether from embarrassment or genuine remorse I couldn't tell, but something in him was breaking. Some wall of arrogance was crumbling, and I felt a strange mixture of anger and pity for this man who had been so blind to his own prejudices. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right, and I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry, truly sorry. Not because of your account balance, but because I treated another human being with disrespect and disdain, and that's inexcusable. I've been in this business for 20 years, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of what really matters. I started judging people by their clothes and their cars and their watches, and I forgot that everyone deserves basic human decency. You could have made a scene, you could have demanded to speak to my supervisor, you could have threatened to take your business elsewhere and probably gotten me fired, but instead you're taking the time to teach me something, and I'm listening. I really am." There was something genuine in his voice now, something vulnerable, and I felt my anger beginning to soften, not disappear entirely, but soften into something more like compassion for someone who had just learned a hard but necessary lesson. I nodded slowly and said, "I'm not going to file a complaint and I'm not going to take my business elsewhere, but I am going to hold you to a higher standard going forward. I want you to remember this moment, remember how you felt when you realized your mistake, and I want you to carry that forward in every interaction you have from now on. Treat the janitor with the same respect you'd treat the CEO. Treat the college student opening their first checking account with the same care you'd treat a millionaire investor. because you never know who you're really dealing with, and more importantly, it shouldn't matter. Everyone deserves respect. He nodded vigorously, wiping at his eyes, and said, I will, I promise you I will, and thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance to learn, to be better. I won't forget this. And I believed him, or at least I wanted to believe him, because people can change, people can grow, people can learn from their mistakes if they're willing to look honestly at themselves and acknowledge their flaws. We spent the next hour discussing my investment options, and it was like dealing with a completely different person. He was attentive, respectful, genuinely interested in understanding my goals and finding the best solutions for my needs, and he never once mentioned my shoes or my clothes or my car or anything else about my appearance. We talked about real estate investments and stock portfolios and bonds and various financial instruments, and he demonstrated a level of expertise and professionalism that I'm sure he was capable of all along, but had withheld from me initially, because he didn't think I was worth his best effort. It was a stark reminder of how much energy people waste maintaining these facades of superiority, how much easier and more fulfilling life becomes when you just treat everyone well from the start. As our meeting was wrapping up, as he was preparing the paperwork for the various transactions and investments we had discussed, he looked at me and said something that I found genuinely touching. He said, Can I ask you something personal? Why do you live the way you do? I mean, with the resources you have, you could live in a mansion, drive a Ferrari, wear custom-tailored suits, have all the luxury anyone could want, but you're sitting here in worn-out shoes and old jeans, and I'm trying to understand why. It was a fair question, asked without judgment this time, just genuine curiosity, and I appreciated his willingness to try to understand rather than simply judge. I thought about how to answer, how to articulate something I had spent years understanding myself, and finally I said, Because those things don't make me happy. I've learned that happiness doesn't come from impressing other people or accumulating stuff or showing off wealth. It comes from living authentically, from being true to your values, from knowing that you're building something meaningful and lasting. My father grew up poor, desperately poor, and he taught me that real wealth is freedom, not possessions. The money I've accumulated gives me freedom. Freedom to not worry about emergencies, freedom to help people I care about, freedom to make choices based on what I want, rather than what I can afford, but it doesn't change who I am at my core. I'm still the same person I was when I was struggling to make rent, still the same person who finds joy in simple things, still the same person who believes that character matters more than cash. These old shoes are comfortable. They've walked with me through the best and worst moments of my life, and I'll replace them when they fall apart completely, but not before, because they remind me where I came from and what really matters. He listened intently, and I could see something shifting in his understanding, some recognition of a different way of thinking about success and wealth and happiness. Besides, I continued, I've seen what wealth does to people, how it changes them, how it isolates them, how it makes them suspicious of everyone's motives, how it turns relationships into transactions and conversations into calculations about what people want from you. I didn't want that life. I didn't want to lose my humanity in pursuit of appearing successful, so I made a choice to keep living the way I always had, to let my wealth work for me in the background while I lived my life in the foreground. And you know what? I'm happier than most of the wealthy people I know, happier than most of the people in those expensive suits walking through your lobby, because I have something they don't have. I have authenticity. I have real relationships built on genuine connection rather than mutual benefit. And I have the knowledge that people like me for who I am, not for what I have. Marcus was nodding slowly, absorbing this, and he said, That's profound, and I think I needed to hear it, not just today, but in general. I've been chasing the wrong things, measuring myself by the wrong metrics, and I think that's part of why I behaved the way I did earlier. I've become so focused on outward appearances that I forgot about inward character. It was a moment of real connection, of genuine human understanding, and I felt like maybe something good was coming out of this uncomfortable experience after all. We finished our business. He walked me out of his office personally, shook my hand warmly, and thanked me again for my patience and for the lesson. And as I walked through that bank lobby toward the exit, I noticed something interesting. He had stopped by the information desk and was speaking with the receptionist who had looked at me with judgment when I first arrived, and I saw him gesture back toward his office and then toward me, and the expression on her face changed from dismissive to shocked, and I imagine he was sharing some version of what had just happened, teaching her the same lesson he had just learned. It made me smile because maybe, just maybe, this experience would ripple outward and change how people in that bank treated all their customers going forward, regardless of appearance. I walked out into the afternoon sunshine, got back in my old car and drove home. And as I drove, I reflected on what had happened and what it meant. Part of me wished I had handled it differently, maybe been less confrontational, maybe just let it go and not said anything at all. But the other part of me, the stronger part, knew that speaking up had been necessary. That silence in the face of disrespect only perpetuates the problem, and that sometimes people need to be confronted with their prejudices in order to grow beyond them. Have you ever had to make a choice between staying silent to keep the peace or speaking up to defend your dignity? It's not easy, and there's no perfect answer. But I learned that day that my voice matters, that standing up for myself and for others who might be treated the same way matters, and that change only happens when people are willing to have uncomfortable conversations. That evening, I sat in my modest apartment, still wearing those old shoes, and I thought about calling my father to tell him the story, but he had passed away years earlier, and I felt a pang of sadness that he wasn't there to share this moment with me. But I also felt his presence in the values he had instilled, in the choices I had made, in the way I had handled the situation. He would have been proud not of my wealth, but of how I had used the experience to teach rather than to punish, to build up rather than to tear down. I realized that wealth, real wealth, isn't about the numbers in your account. It's about having the character to treat people well regardless of their circumstances. And ironically, the bank manager who had judged me for my appearance had been far poorer in that moment than I was, because he lacked the wealth of humility, of kindness, of basic human decency. The days and weeks that followed that encounter brought unexpected changes in my life, and in my perspective on wealth, success, and human nature. I found myself thinking more deeply about the masks we all wear, the facades we maintain, the ways we present ourselves to the world, and the gaps between who we are and who we appear to be. I had spent years intentionally maintaining a humble external appearance while building substantial internal wealth, and I had convinced myself that this was purely about staying true to my values, about not becoming corrupted by materialism, about keeping my relationships authentic. But that day at the bank forced me to examine whether there was also an element of pride in my humility, whether I had been judging people for their superficiality, while secretly enjoying the moments when I could prove them wrong, whether my worn shoes had become their own kind of status symbol, a badge of my supposed moral superiority. It was an uncomfortable realization, this awareness that my motivations might not have been as pure as I had believed, that perhaps I had been guilty of my own form of judgment, just inverted, looking down on those who valued appearances while taking satisfaction in my ability to surprise them with my hidden wealth. I spent a lot of time sitting with that discomfort, interrogating my own intentions, trying to understand the complex mixture of genuine values and subtle ego that had shaped my choices over the years. What I came to understand was that we're all messy, complicated creatures, capable of holding contradictory truths simultaneously, capable of being both humble and proud, both authentic and performative, both generous and self-serving. The key isn't achieving some perfect state of enlightenment where all our motivations are pure and all our actions are selfless. The key is remaining aware of our contradictions, examining them honestly, and trying to do better even when we fall short. I also started thinking more about Marcus, the bank manager, and what his life must be like, how he got to that place where he could look at another human being with such casual contempt, what disappointments or fears or insecurities drove him to find his sense of worth in putting others down. It's easy to villainize people who treat us badly, to reduce them to one-dimensional characters in our personal narratives, but the truth is always more complex. Everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, carrying wounds we can't see, struggling with demons we'll never understand. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, doesn't mean we should tolerate disrespect, but it does mean we should try to maintain some compassion even for those who fail to show us compassion, because that's what separates us from them. That's what makes us better, not in a superior way, but in a more human way. I started making some changes in my life after that day, small but significant shifts in how I related to money and to people and to myself. I finally bought new shoes, not because I was ashamed of the old ones, but because I realized I had been clinging to them as a symbol, using them to make a point, and that was its own form of dishonesty. I bought comfortable, practical shoes that happened to be new. and I donated my old ones to a homeless shelter, where someone who actually needed them could put them to good use instead of them being a philosophical statement on my feet. I started dressing a bit better, not expensively but more intentionally, because I realized that while I didn't want to value appearance over substance, there was nothing virtuous about deliberately looking worse than necessary, and that taking some care in my presentation wasn't the same as being materialistic. I also started being more open about my financial success with the people in my life who mattered, not broadcasting it or showing off, but being honest in conversations where it was relevant, because I realized that my secrecy had sometimes made things awkward or had prevented me from helping people who could have used assistance, because they didn't know I was in a position to help. One of my oldest friends had been struggling with medical bills for his daughter's treatment, and he had never mentioned it to me because he assumed I was in the same financial boat as him, barely getting by, and when I finally opened up and offered to help, the look of relief and gratitude on his face made me understand that my pride in my financial humility had actually been a form of selfishness, keeping me from being the friend and support system I could have been. I paid off his medical debt completely, and when he tried to protest when he insisted he would pay me back, I told him the same thing my father once told a neighbor who needed help. Pay it forward when you can. Help someone else when you're able. That's how we make the world better. One act of kindness at a time. The tears in his eyes, the weight that lifted from his shoulders, the change in his whole demeanor when that crushing financial burden was removed, that brought me more joy than any investment return or account balance ever could. And I realized that maybe the real purpose of my wealth wasn't to prove a point about materialism or to maintain some philosophical stance about humility. Maybe it was to be able to help people I cared about, to make tangible differences in real lives, to use my resources to reduce suffering and increase opportunity for others. I started volunteering at a financial literacy program in my community, teaching people from low-income backgrounds about saving, investing, budgeting, and building long-term wealth, sharing the knowledge and strategies that had allowed me to build my own financial security. It was incredibly rewarding, sitting in community centers and libraries with people who were hungry to learn, who wanted to break cycles of poverty and create better futures for their families, who just needed someone to explain the basics that more privileged people learn automatically through osmosis in their social environments. I saw myself in many of those students, remembered what it was like to be young and broke and confused about money, trying to figure things out on my own because no one in my family had the knowledge to guide me. I shared not just technical information about compound interest and diversification, but also the philosophical foundations that had guided my approach, the importance of delayed gratification, the power of living below your means, the freedom that comes from not needing to impress anyone, the security that comes from making smart decisions consistently over time. Some of my students started to see results quickly, calling me excitedly to report that they had opened their first investment account, or paid off their first credit card or saved their first emergency fund, and those conversations filled me with a sense of purpose I had never felt in my regular work. This was real impact, real change, real contribution to making the world a bit better, and it had nothing to do with how much money I had and everything to do with what I chose to do with it, and with the knowledge I had accumulated. I thought about the bank manager again, about how he measured people by their account balances and their shoes and their suits, and I felt sorry for him because he was missing the whole point of wealth, missing the opportunity to use his position and knowledge to actually help people rather than just gatekeep and judge them. Have you ever discovered that your purpose was something completely different from what you thought it was? Have you ever had a moment where everything suddenly made sense, where all your experiences and knowledge and resources aligned into a clear path forward? That's what happened to me in the months after that day at the bank, and it changed everything. My relationship with money evolved into something healthier, more balanced, less charged with proving points or maintaining philosophical positions, and more focused on using it as a tool for good. I started a small foundation focused on providing microloans to entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, people who had viable business ideas but couldn't get traditional bank financing because they didn't fit the right profile, because they didn't have the right connections, because they wore old shoes to their meetings with loan officers. I thought about how many potentially successful businesses never got started because someone like Marcus Patterson looked at the entrepreneur and decided they weren't worth the investment, and I wanted to create an alternative path, a place where people were judged by their ideas and their work ethic and their determination, rather than by their appearance or their credit score. The foundation was small, just me and a couple of volunteers at first, operating out of my apartment with a modest initial investment, but it grew steadily as we helped person after person launch businesses that succeeded, that created jobs, that lifted families out of poverty, that proved that talent and potential are distributed far more widely than opportunity. We funded a single mother who wanted to start a catering business and now employs 15 people in her community. We funded a young veteran who wanted to open a bicycle repair shop and now runs a thriving business that also provides free repairs for underprivileged kids. We funded an immigrant family who wanted to start a small grocery store specializing in foods from their home country and now serves as a cultural anchor for their entire community. These stories, these successes, these lives changed for the better. This became my real wealth, my true return on investment, and it made every penny I had accumulated worth it because it was being put to use in ways that mattered, in ways that created ripples of positive change that extended far beyond just the immediate recipients. I remembered my father's words about character being built in quiet moments when no one was watching, and I realized that the same was true about wealth. Real wealth is built in how you use it when no one is applauding, in the lives you change without needing recognition, in the good you do simply because it's the right thing to do, not because it will earn you praise or tax deductions or positive press. The foundation also became a place where I could address the kinds of prejudices and assumptions that I had experienced at the bank, working with partner organizations to provide not just capital, but also mentorship, business training, and connections to networks that might otherwise exclude people from certain backgrounds. We deliberately sought out applicants who had been rejected by traditional lenders, who had been told they weren't the right fit, who had been judged harshly because of their appearance or their accent or their zip code or their past mistakes, and we gave them a chance to prove what they could do with a fair opportunity. The success rate was remarkably high, much higher than I had expected, which proved what I had always suspected, that most people don't fail because they lack ability or determination. They fail because they lack access to resources and opportunities, and because the systems we've built are designed to perpetuate existing inequalities rather than challenge them. Every business we funded that succeeded was a small act of rebellion against those systems, a proof point that different criteria for evaluation could lead to better outcomes, and I found deep satisfaction in knowing that my wealth was being deployed in service of changing the game rather than just winning at the existing game. I thought often about what the world would look like if everyone who had resources chose to use them this way, if banks actually invested in communities rather than just extracting wealth from them, if success was measured by how many people you lifted up rather than by how high you climbed above others, if we valued contribution over accumulation and compassion over competition. It seemed so simple, so obvious, and yet it was so rare, and that made me sad but also motivated, because it meant there was so much work to do, so much opportunity to make a difference, so many lives that could be changed if more people chose to see wealth as a responsibility and an opportunity rather than just a personal achievement. I shared these thoughts in conversations with other wealthy individuals I met through various business and philanthropic circles, and the reactions were mixed. Some people genuinely inspired and eager to join the effort, others defensive and dismissive, claiming that people needed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps without help, that providing opportunity was somehow enabling dependency, that the system worked fine for those who truly deserved success. These conversations were frustrating but illuminating, revealing how deeply some people needed to believe in meritocracy as a way of justifying their own wealth and status, how threatened they felt by suggestions that maybe luck and privilege and access played larger roles in success than they wanted to admit. As months turned into a year and then longer, I found that my life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted when I walked into that bank in my old shoes. I was still living relatively simply, still driving a modest car, still in the same apartment, but now it was a conscious choice based on genuine contentment rather than a philosophical stance or a point I was trying to prove. I had learned to hold my values more lightly, less rigidly, understanding that there was no single right way to live, that different people found meaning and purpose in different ways, and that my path was just that, my path, not a blueprint everyone else needed to follow. I had also learned to be more forgiving of people's judgments and assumptions because I understood that we all make them. We all fall into patterns of stereotyping and quick evaluation based on limited information, and the goal isn't to never judge but to remain open to being proven wrong. to adjusting our views when new information becomes available, to treating our initial impressions as hypotheses to be tested rather than conclusions to be defended. The bank manager, Marcus, had actually become someone I respected after that initial encounter. He had taken the lesson to heart and had made real changes in his professional behavior and his personal life, reaching out to me a few months later to tell me he had implemented new training protocols at the bank, focused on unconscious bias and customer service excellence, that he had personally mentored several junior employees on treating every customer with dignity, that the experience had prompted him to examine other areas of his life where he had been judgmental or prejudiced, and that he was working on becoming a better person. We had actually become friends in an unexpected way, meeting occasionally for coffee, talking about life and business and the challenge of living with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. And I was proud of him for doing the hard work of change rather than just apologizing and moving on. It reminded me that humans have remarkable capacity for growth when we're willing to be honest with ourselves about our flaws and to put in the effort to do better. He told me once that he still thought about our encounter regularly, that it had been one of the most humiliating moments of his life, but also one of the most important, that he was grateful I had confronted him rather than just taking my business elsewhere, because it had given him an opportunity to change course rather than continuing down a path that would have eventually destroyed his career and his character. Looking back now, I can see how that single day at the bank became a catalyst for transformation, not just for Marcus but for me as well, forcing me to examine my own relationship with wealth, with humility, with authenticity, with purpose. The worn shoes that Marcus had judged so harshly had actually become a teacher for both of us, revealing truths about who we were and who we wanted to be. For him, they revealed the superficiality of his value system, the emptiness of judging people by appearances, the cost of cynicism and condescension. For me, they revealed the complexity of my own motivations, the ways I had been using my humble lifestyle as its own form of performance, the opportunities I had missed by being so focused on not appearing wealthy that I had neglected to fully embrace the responsibility that comes with wealth. We both walked away from that encounter changed, humbled in different ways, committed to doing better. I think about that day whenever I'm tempted to judge someone based on superficial characteristics, whenever I catch myself making assumptions about someone's capabilities or worth based on how they present themselves, and it reminds me to pause, to question my initial reaction, to give people the benefit of the doubt and the dignity of being seen as full human beings rather than as characters in my personal narrative. I also think about it whenever I'm making decisions about my resources, about my time, about my energy, asking myself whether I'm using what I have in service of something larger than myself, in service of reducing suffering and expanding opportunity, in service of making the world a little bit better than I found it. These aren't easy questions, and I don't always get the answers right, but I keep asking them, keep trying, keep learning. And that feels like the best any of us can do, to remain committed to growth, to stay humble in the face of our own limitations, to keep reaching for better versions of ourselves even when we fall short. The bank encounter taught me that everyone we meet is carrying stories we can't see, fighting battles we don't understand, and capable of both tremendous cruelty and tremendous kindness depending on the circumstances and their level of self-awareness in any given moment. So where does all this leave me now? Several years after that transformative day, I'm still wearing comfortable shoes, though different ones now, still living in ways that feel authentic to me rather than impressive to others, still trying to use my resources to make a positive difference in the world around me. The foundation has grown beyond what I imagined possible. We've funded over 200 small businesses now, helped create over 1,000 jobs, lifted hundreds of families toward financial stability, and every single one of those stories matters. Every single one represents a life changed, a dream realized, an opportunity seized that might not have existed otherwise. I've also become more involved in advocacy work, pushing for policy changes that would make the financial system more accessible and equitable, that would require banks to evaluate loan applications based on more holistic criteria, that would protect consumers from predatory lending practices and discriminatory treatment. It's slow work, frustrating work, facing entrenched interests and systemic inertia, but it's important work, and I've learned that real change happens through sustained effort over time, not through single dramatic moments. The day at the bank was dramatic, yes, but its real impact came from everything that followed, from the choices I made in response to that experience, from the commitments I upheld over time, from the consistent application of values across thousands of small decisions and interactions. That's the real lesson, I think, that character isn't built in moments but in patterns, in the accumulation of choices over time, in what we do not just when we're angry or inspired, but in the ordinary moments when no one is watching and there's no obvious reward for doing the right thing. I share this story now not because I think I handled everything perfectly, I didn't, and not because I think I've figured out all the answers, I haven't, but because I believe there's value in being honest about the messiness of growth, the complexity of virtue, the challenges of living with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've listened to every word of this long, winding narrative, then maybe you're someone who's also grappling with questions about wealth and worth, about appearance and reality, about who you are versus who you appear to be. And I want you to know that you're not alone in those struggles, that we're all trying to figure it out, that there's no shame in uncertainty or complexity or changing your mind as you learn and grow. I want to tell you one more thing before I close this story, something important that I've learned through all of this. Your worth as a human being has nothing to do with your bank account, nothing to do with your clothes or your car, or where you live, or what you do for work. Your worth comes from how you treat people, from the kindness you show to strangers, from the integrity you maintain when no one is watching, from the courage you demonstrate in standing up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable, from the love you give to the people around you, from the contributions you make to your community however small they might seem, from the authentic life you build that reflects your genuine values rather than society's expectations. Whether you're wearing worn-out shoes or designer loafers, whether your bank account has $6 or $6 million, whether you're struggling to make rent or deciding which investment property to buy, your human dignity is inherent and equal and deserving of respect. Don't let anyone treat you like you're less than you are, and equally importantly, don't treat anyone else like they're less than they are. We're all in this together, all struggling with our own challenges, all doing the best we can with what we have, and the world becomes better when we choose compassion over judgment, when we choose to see each other's humanity rather than each other's exteriors, when we choose to lift each other up rather than put each other down. The bank manager learned this lesson the hard way, and I learned some parallel lessons about my own blind spots and contradictions, and now I'm sharing these lessons with you, in the hope that maybe you can learn them without having to go through the painful experiences that taught them to us. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Have you ever judged someone else unfairly? Have you ever discovered that someone you underestimated was actually extraordinary, or that someone you overestimated was actually ordinary? These experiences shape us, teach us, humble us, and if we're paying attention, they make us better, more thoughtful, more compassionate versions of ourselves. I'd love to hear your story, your experiences with judgment and assumptions and the gaps between appearance and reality. Comment below, and tell me about a time when you were surprised by someone, when your assumptions were proven wrong, when you learned something important about not judging books by their covers or people by their shoes. Share your thoughts, your reflections, your reactions to this story, because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about how we navigate a world that constantly pressures us to judge and be judged, to perform and evaluate, to wear masks and see through them. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question something you had taken for granted, please leave a like on this video. It helps more people find these stories and benefits from these lessons. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more honest, raw, real accounts of life experiences that teach us about ourselves and each other, please subscribe to Through My Eyes and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. This channel is dedicated to sharing authentic human stories that matter, that teach, that inspire, that connect us to our shared humanity, and your support makes it possible to keep creating this content. Thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to my story, for engaging with these ideas, and for being part of this community of people who believe that there's value in looking deeper, in questioning assumptions, in treating each other with dignity and respect, regardless of external circumstances. Until next time, keep wearing whatever shoes make you comfortable, keep living authentically, keep treating people well, and keep your heart open to the lessons that life is constantly trying to teach us, if we're willing to pay attention.